All right, let's jump right in. We're going to explore a really fascinating what-if scenario. How a war with Iran could totally unravel a second Trump presidency. It's a huge foreign policy gamble, and we're going to break down how it could all go wrong.
And believe it or not, the whole thing kicks off with this just wild private admission from Donald Trump himself. This was said months before any shots were fired. It's a quote that really just perfectly captures the political ground shifting right under his feet and, sets the whole stage for a crisis that could totally define his legacy.
So, to really get how we get to that point, we're going to walk through this story in 5 parts. First, the Iran war gamble itself. Then we'll look at the path to war, how America ended up with an unpopular ally, and what that did to the powerful pro-Israel lobby. And finally, we'll see how it all comes to a head with Trump's big November reckoning.
Okay, so let's start by jumping right into the thick of it. Picture this. It's early 2026. A war that was promised to be quick, clean, and decisive, well, it turned out to be anything but.
So the operation kicks off on February 28th. But within just a day, 24 hours, Iran hits back, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. And just like that, you've got a global energy crisis on your hands. By the middle of March, that big promise of the war, that the Iranian regime would just crumble, it was obvious that was a total fantasy. You've got a frustrated Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, and the U.S. is now stuck in this incredibly costly mess with no easy way out.
So, you gotta ask, how on earth did it get to this point? Let's hit rewind and look at the chain of events starting right after the 2024 election that led President Trump to make this absolutely fateful decision.
And this is where you see this just incredible irony. So an internal Democratic Party analysis basically concluded that Kamala Harris lost the 2024 election partly because the Biden administration's super strong support for Israel turned off some key voters. Now fast forward just 2 years, and you got Donald Trump risking his entire presidency on that exact same issue.
And the timeline here, the path to war is just shockingly fast. On February 11th, Netanyahu flies in and personally pitches Trump this sure-win plan. He promises the Iranian regime will collapse in no time. The very next day, the CIA gives its assessment to the president. And what do they say? They say the Israeli plan is completely, dangerously unrealistic. But on February 27th, Trump decides to ignore his own intelligence agencies, trust his gut, and he orders the attack.
And this just perfectly illustrates that disconnect. When the director of the CIA was asked to give Trump the bottom line on the intelligence community's view of Israel's plan, he used just one word: farcical. I mean, can you imagine? Farcical. It was this huge, flashing red light, a warning about the massive gap between what was being promised and what American intelligence knew was reality.
Okay, so now let's look at the fallout. How did this decision, based on a plan called farcical by his own CIA, just trigger a total collapse in public support? And not just for the war itself, but for America's key ally in the region, Israel.
By late March 2026, so we're talking less than a month into the fighting, the numbers were just grim for the White House. 59%, a clear, decisive majority of Americans, nearly 6 out of every 10 people, were against the war in Iran.
But what's really fascinating here is why people opposed it. Look at this. When you ask them, who does this war benefit more? A massive 56% of Americans said Israel. Only 18% thought it was mainly for America's benefit. The message from the public was loud and clear. This isn't our war. And that perception really cemented Israel's new status in American politics as, well, the unpopular ally. It's a term for when a partner nation becomes so controversial back home that just supporting them becomes a huge political liability for the president and, for his entire party.
And listen, this wasn't just about the war. Just before the conflict kicked off, a Gallup poll in February 2026 showed something that was just a historic shift. For the first time in 25 years of polling, more Americans, 41%, said they sympathized more with the Palestinians than with the Israelis. This was a political earthquake.
And when you dig into those numbers, you find what might be the biggest long-term problem for this alliance. This massive generational divide. An incredible 75%, 3/4 of young Americans, we're talking 18 to 29-year-olds, had a negative view of Israel. Now, this wasn't just a blip. It was a fundamental shift, fueled by years of social media, new ways of getting information. The very foundation of American support was cracking.
And then, this narrative, the idea that America got dragged into a war it didn't want, was basically cemented by a bombshell resignation. Joe Kent, a top intelligence official, quits, and he releases this letter that just says it plainly. We began this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby groups. That letter went viral.
We're talking over 100 million views. The story was set in stone.
So you have this tidal wave of negative public opinion, and it creates a crisis for an institution that, for a long time, was considered untouchable in Washington, the powerful pro-Israel lobby. You know, that network of groups that has always worked to shape U.S. policy in the Middle East.
Yet for decades, the lobby's message was simple. It was effective. It was being pro-Israel is good policy and it's good politics. But in this new environment, that whole formula just got turned completely on its head. The money that used to guarantee you influence was now seen by a lot of candidates as politically, well, toxic.
And activists jumped all over this. They created tools like this AIPAC tracker. It was super simple, color-coded. If you were a candidate who refused the lobby's money, you got a green card. You were seen as principled, independent. But if you took the money, you got a red card, marking your campaign as tainted by what opponents started calling blood money. It was basically public shaming on a massive national scale.
And here's the crazy thing. President Trump totally saw this coming. Months before the war, back in August 2025, he admitted in an interview that the lobby's iron grip on Congress was fading. He knew the ground was shifting under his feet. And yet, he still walked right into the trap.
All right, so how does all of this, the unpopular war, the toxic ally, the weakened lobby, how does it all come crashing down on the president himself? It all comes to a head at one critical moment, the 2026 midterm elections.
And I mean, everything was on the line here. You've got the Iran war as the #1 issue for voters, Trump's own popularity is cratered, so Republican control of Congress, it's in serious, serious jeopardy. And for Trump, losing Congress isn't just a political setback, it's an existential threat to his presidency.
And you can just see the pressure building on Capitol Hill. Look at this. In April of 2025, a vote to block arms to Israel gets just 15 votes in the Senate. 15! 1 year later, right in the middle of this Iran war, that number jumps to 40. The opposition was growing, and man, it was growing fast.
And Trump himself, he knew exactly what was at stake. In a speech to Republicans in January 2026, this is before the war even started, he laid it out plain as day. He said, if we don't win the midterms, the Democrats will find a reason to impeach me, and they will impeach me. The war just made that threat 10 times more real.
And all of this brings us to the final, really big question that hangs over this entire scenario. This whole chain of events, from a lost election to a disastrous war. It forces you to ask, are we witnessing the beginning of a fundamental break in the U.S.-Israel relationship? And if that's true, could the next president, Democrat or Republican, be the one who finally makes that break official?